All right, hello and welcome to the Viking Codecast. My name is Erik Trautman, founder of Viking Code School, and apparently today I'm just an avatar. Um, we had a little bit of technical difficulties getting this off the ground, but we're all here now and all is well. So I'm really excited to welcome Rachael with us, who is a long-time UI developer, front-end developer, designer extraordinaire. We're going to hear all about everything that she's been able to do. We are going to be talking specifically, hopefully, about some things around AngularJS specifically, because that is actually where the students, a number of the folks who are here with us today, and I'm gesturing with my hands, but you can't see it because I'm just an avatar. A number of these students here today with us are working through AngularJS on their final projects as they go through the curriculum. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are going to be viewing later who are also interested in learning some of the tips for specifically developers who might be kind of getting up to speed with development and Angular and trying to kind of get into the workforce and understand best practices and all those types of things. So I'm really excited to welcome Rachael. Rachael, thank you for coming. Thank you everyone else for being here. And I guess usually the best way for us to kick off is just to learn a little bit more about you. So would you mind just kind of walking us through what you've been through?
Sure. I made a couple of slides, so I'm just going to share these.
Oh, great.
Um, so, thank you for having me. I'm Rachael. I'm a senior UI engineer at OpenTable. I moved out to San Francisco on the West Coast about 2 years ago from the East Coast, from North Florida, which, as we say there, is basically South Georgia. So don't think Miami. My background is I started doing freelance web design about, I guess it's been a good 15 years ago. I started in around 98. Kind of self-taught myself HTML. CSS was not as big of a thing back then because it barely worked across browsers. And we mostly did layouts and tables. So then I switched from being a web designer to doing more code a couple years after I got into the industry, like working for companies directly. Then I switched to your kind of front-end development, and now I concentrate very much on UI engineering, specifically for the web. So what I've been working on with Angular, especially, over the last 2 years has been what I call UI components that are based on the kind of new up-and-coming web component standards. And the reason that we do this is I like to say that web UIs are a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle in multiple ways. First of all, when it comes to a UI, it's sort of we're combining information architecture, visual design, motion design, to kind of put together something that suggests actions to users. And then when we code all that up, we're coding it in a bunch of different languages. We're writing CSS, we're writing JavaScript, we're writing markup. We also have like raster images, vector images, and we just have plain text. So the web UI only becomes a clear picture when all of that stuff is put together. And we can kind of look to how to do that well by looking at standard HTML. The issue comes in when we don't want the standard HTML's appearance. We have our apps, we need to do our branded UIs. So it'd be really great if we could make it just as easy to use your branded UIs as it is to use standard HTML. And Angular actually really helps you do this by allowing you to create element directives that when you put them on the page, work just like standard HTML elements. So that's what I've been working on for the past 2 years with Angular. And I'm happy to take kind of any questions that you guys have about it.
Yeah, so just a note to anyone who's viewing, you guys can also use the Q&A app, which again I think is on the left side, possibly on the top of your Hangout window. It's the little teal-colored one, and you can ask a question there. You can ask a question on Twitter. You can ask a question pretty much anywhere we can find it. And otherwise, those of the students who are here, feel free to fire away.
Yeah, hi. I had a quick question. this may be a little off topic, but having learned a bit of Angular 1 and just reading a lot about the industry and how there's many like options for front end frameworks, and I was just wondering how the landscape looks for in terms of Angular 2, and is the transition pretty rough, or how are people handling that?
So we're not using it yet. I think right now our current plan is to use it, and we're trying to keep an eye on it. I'm not part of the core team. I haven't put one together, so take this with a grain of salt. It looks like the full beta is going to be out real soon. So, I mean, in my opinion, that's kind of ahead of schedule. It's ahead of when I would have expected it to sort of show up. And as far as like picking is concerned, the way that I see it is that like Angular is a web application framework, and to a degree, so is React. It concentrates only on one part of the stack. Same is true kind of Backbone, Ember, and their job is to kind of provide you with the tools necessary for you to build your product and get out of the way. But everybody has very, very different tastes and opinions about what that actually looks like, about what's actually needed, and what they feel is getting out of the way. Because what getting out of the way means to someone might be getting in my way to somebody else. So basically, when you're picking a framework, you have to remember that every single choice has trade-offs. At the same time, you're making some things easier, faster, and better. You're making some other things harder, slower, and worse. That's just how it is. These kind of fandom cults that kind of rise up around certain frameworks are a little silly from that perspective, because each framework is great in its ways and not so great in other ways. Our job is to look at what our product needs and make the best pick. And basically, a good architect's job is to allow us to make that choice at the last possible second, because we never have all the information we need. When we're putting together a product. The longer we can wait to lock ourselves in, the more information we'll have, and the better our choice will be. So when it comes to using Angular 2, it looks really exciting to me. I think it's got some great enhancements. I like a lot of the ideas behind it. It looks like basically what they're doing right now is every kind of new semi-major version of Angular 1 that they're putting out, they're kind of trying to make that gap between the two a little smaller, to make it like easier with 1.4, 1.5, probably 1.6 if or when there is one, is making the transition from 1 to 2 a little bit easier. So basically, if you're currently working with Angular 1 or you're afraid of it, just try and use the latest Angular 1 and try and kind of keep up with the releases as close as you can, because that will kind of help you transition to Angular 2 a little bit easier. Like the component syntax that they released in Angular 1.5, that was really important. But you can kind of see with controller as, that was helpful. And then bind to controller, that was in 1.4, that was really, or 1.3, that was really helpful. And was there another aspect to that question that I didn't hit on?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Great answer. Yeah.
I actually have a question. You've obviously come quite a ways and seen a lot in terms of the development on the front end, and obviously things were very different not too long ago. And so what I'm kind of curious about is specifically with relation to your job as a front end developer, UI developer. What's changed in the last few years, or maybe, I don't know exactly how many years you want to tick off on that, but from sort of operating within the HTML, CSS environment to bringing JavaScript into the browser to then taking this super-powered framework-sized approach to things? How has that evolution affected your day-to-day almost?
It's really kind of interesting because there's a lot of places you could kind of make pit stops on that. It used to be that JavaScript was considered sort of an enhancement to HTML and CSS. You mostly only used it kind of sparingly in a DHTML style to kind of make your HTML a little bit more dynamic. You didn't build entire kind of, algorithms in the client using JavaScript. So, first of all, what's changed in the last 6 or so years is how important JavaScript is to being really successful as a web developer, and how much you can do with it. That's been a huge change. That's been a little good and a little bad, because I went through the era of kind of unobtrusive JavaScript, and I personally was very persuaded by a lot of the ideas in that. But there are certain things you just simply can't do with unobtrusive JavaScript, like these full single-page web applications, that are so. It's just
for the benefit of everyone. Do you mind just kind of talking just briefly about unobtrusive JavaScript?
Well, unobtrusive JavaScript was kind of like the whole point was to kind of make your website or application work without JavaScript. Say someone came to the page and JavaScript was turned off, or there was a network failure and they didn't get all the scripts they needed. If they clicked on a link, the link would still navigate somewhere. Was sort of the idea. It might not work the exact same way, and it might not work as well, and it might lack some bells and whistles. But the general idea was do as much as you can with lower level kind of non-scripting technologies. If you want a link, use a link. And then if you want, when JavaScript is enabled, for that link to open up, not by navigating to another page, but by opening up a modal, enhance that part with JavaScript, but make it so that it will still work when JavaScript's not there. That was great. Had a lot of like really good practices when you got used to that. But with a single page,
Rails uses too.
Yes, yeah, exactly. With a single page web application, they are also sometimes known as like a thick or fat client application. A lot of the code that actually creates the functionality runs in the client. So there's no such thing as the application being able to work without JavaScript, because the application is literally written in JavaScript. That means less full page refreshes, less kind of need for backend stuff, but kind of makes it a little bit more challenging, I think, for accessibility and for kind of fault tolerance.
Cool. And then kind of circling back to the original one was, I guess, then specifically in terms of the way that you approach development on almost a day-to-day basis, like how's your tool set changed, and also like your ability to do different things?
Well, it's a lot bigger. I think that we've had a huge explosion in tooling, the last 5 or so years. One of the things that people used to say about web development was that it had a low barrier of entry, and it's hard to always say why that's the case. But one of the things that people would sometimes point at that might have been a contributing factor to this low barrier of entry was the fact that kind of the languages that you were writing your code in, and then the languages that you were deploying were the same languages. There wasn't this like long kind of I have to compile to a binary and then send it out, and then who knows how it's going to run on the target environment. You would write HTML and you would deploy HTML. So this made it like faster and more direct for a lot of people. That was the thinking. And now, between preprocessors and transpilers, and just the fact that we're moving more and more functionality into the front end on the client, that means more testing of the client. Just the whole pipeline and the tooling situation is now really intense. That's a huge part of my job now over the last 4 years that I didn't even really think about before. I mostly think that's a good thing. I like DevOps culture, this idea of cross-functionality, and being able to learn from people who have different specializations. On the other hand, it can be pretty frustrating when your build pipeline gets in the way of you being able to do your work. But like I said earlier, everything has trade-offs, right? So that's another big change. I think those are the two biggest ones.
So what tool sets do you actually use then as part of that deployment process?
So let's see. Doing mostly UI, I kind of leave off on the whole build artifact stage, but mostly Grunt or Gulp. We do a little bit of transpiling. Was CoffeeScript to JavaScript. Now it's future JavaScript to current JavaScript. So we'll do CoffeeScript transpile or ES6 to ES5 transpile. We'll do Sass to CSS. Then we'll do minification and kind of combining those into a single sort of distributable file along with HTML templates. And then we have a bunch of testing. We have JavaScript unit tests, CSS unit tests, end-to-end tests. So we'll use like Karma and Protractor, and let's see, what else have I used? What is it called? Some of the CSS visual testing frameworks. Names escape me at the moment. And that can take, we have one application right now that the whole testing process takes about 45 minutes from start to finish. One of the nice things about working on, yeah, it's pretty bad. Everybody's complaining about it. So one of the nice things about working on UI components is we try to build the tests in with the UI component. And because it's so small and focused, almost no test runs take very long. And theoretically, we can share the tests. At least that's what we're hoping.
So I think the idea of like that there is a difference between working on a full application and working on a UI component may not be familiar to a lot of folks. Do you mind just talking about how that goes down? Like, what is that difference?
Sure.
How are they used?
Let me find some examples. It makes it a little bit easier to.
I promise I'll stop hogging the questions after this. So, all of you in here, you're up next.
All right. So I'm going to share this screen again. Okay. All right, so here's an example of a UI component. Harkening back to that definition I gave earlier, it's mostly just an HTML element. In this case, we've used an Angular attribute directive to enhance the normal checkbox input. So when we do that, we can kind of think about the checkbox control as a generic element. We start where HTML leaves off. We enhance it with our particular branding. And then we just have some tips. So obviously, if I'm going to test this, all I really have to test is that when I use this shows up on the screen. And then when it's not checked, it looks like this. And then when it is checked, it looks like this. On the other hand, if I am thinking about this checkbox here within my application, I actually have to test that when this box is checked and I submit with a correct password, that when I leave and come back, I'm still signed in. Obviously, one operates at a much lower level, and it's kind of much easier to reason about and test, and it's going to take less time to test because the test itself is less complicated. The entire application would include checkboxes, but obviously it will have lots of other things in it too.
Cool.
Excellent responsive design going on here. All right, so this is like the entire application. And this is an example of a component that I might work on. So if that, hopefully that was a clear explanation.
Yeah, those are really cool. I could watch you play with them all day.
Yeah, this one is one I'm looking forward to componentizing. It's not currently, but this one's going to be a lot of fun. So checkbox is one that we've done. We did text also. We did this one such that both input type text and text area are kind of treated as the same component in two different modes.
Are these available open source, or is this just?
Not yet. We're getting much closer. The whole suite will be, but we don't want to do it until we have the theming completely finished, because obviously we don't think that most people are going to want to make guest center themed applications. I mean, probably. Right. It's not like we're material design.
and so the idea of theming then would be essentially a theme is sort of like a skin on top of it that you.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think that's one of my kind of biggest pet peeves, sort of, with CSS frameworks, is that they make getting rid of or customizing the default theming not as easy as it could be, or you have to prune a lot of dead code, or you have to write a bunch of overriding rules. I don't like 700 variable long style sheets, because as far as I'm concerned, I can write border radius 3px myself, rather than having a variable that represents a border radius that I may or may not actually have. So we're hoping to kind of do it in such a way that they can be distributed without any kind of theming whatsoever. Just basically the bare necessity as far as styles are concerned.
Cool. Okay, I have one more before. do you know any UI component libraries that you found helpful to learn from, like open source ones?
Well, all of them, definitely. Twitter Bootstrap has a lot of really good stuff in it.
Do they have ones for Angular?
There's an Angular UI library that basically takes Bootstrap and kind of wraps it in some directives and services. So basically, you make sure you load Bootstrap onto the page, the CSS part of the framework, and then you can pull in the various Angular directives. It's been pretty popular. We've referred to its code for ideas on a number of occasions. Also, Angular's Angular material, both 1 and 2. 2, I believe, is out. Does have some great. Those are great ones to reference. There's also just a bunch of other ones. Semantic UI is really interesting, just philosophically. And there was jQuery UI, Multools UI, bunches of them.
Yep. Great. Thank you. I promised I'd stop hogging the spotlight here. So, someone else have a question? And by the way, again, as a note, anyone can submit questions outside via the Q&A app.
You talked a little bit about UI libraries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any go-to just Angular libraries? Like we use REST Angular a lot in Viking, and UI Router as just go-to plugins, I guess, that you use. Do you have go-to things that just make developing in Angular easier?
Definitely the Angular UI Router. They're releasing a new one, though, for the core team, for Angular 1 series that I believe is out now in beta or something along those lines, and that one may take over as my go-to. But I think mostly the ones that are always big go-tos for me are, like you said, Angular UI Router, Angular Animate, the full version, and Angular Mocks. Those are the ones that I always find myself using. Other than that, no. Not because there aren't good ones, just because those are the ones that I always find myself using.
Awesome, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Other question?
Hmm?
Just curious if we have any other questions here. So I can always keep going. Well, so one thing that I think surprises a lot of people, or even makes them a little anxious about getting onto the job as opposed to kind of learning up and building side projects, is the idea of support and accessibility, and sort of what is the difference between building my side project for myself and my friends, I don't really care, versus actually being on a dev team that has an obligation to serve, some standard deviate, so some confidence interval worth of their users across all their platforms. What are the big changes that the big issues in that jump that you've encountered, particularly being on the front end in this new environment?
So, funnily enough, I think I've probably actually ended up doing a lot more work toward accessibility and really wide support on personal projects than on professional projects, especially with UX kind of design driving product development. The general kind of, no, this is my perspective, but the general idea is, you come up with a few representative users. And like in my experience, typically those users don't include people that have, that are blind or deaf or, have mobility issues. Unless, of course, your product is for someone, for people who are elderly, then that would make its way into your persona. And because the personas don't include it, we typically don't find ourselves spending much time on it. Because not only did the product design not take it into account, neither did the visual design. And now that we're coding it up, which is really more like the third step of the process, we're sort of inheriting a lack of emphasis on it. So I would honestly recommend, when you do your personal projects, take that as your sandbox. Because most of the time, the only way you're going to have the time to sit down and really learn the tools that you need to properly support accessibility is going to be on your own time at first. That's just a reality. Most companies will say we just don't have time for it. Those tools I would definitely say is learn Aria. Definitely learn that. Take a step back and look at some of those unobtrusive JavaScript, like top 10 best unobtrusive JavaScript practices, because those typically are good accessibility practices as well. Then when it comes to internationalization, one of my favorite things is like mock translations, where you take your English string and you sort of mangle it and make it twice as long. That kind of allows you to code UIs that are a little bit more tolerant of, on-the-fly translation changes early, before you actually even have the real translation or even the real text that's supposed to go into the product. That's been really invaluable.
Cool. So, what are kind of the other? I mean, are there any other low-hanging fruit that people can take a look at? Aria sounds interesting.
Let me think. Well, if you're not having to go to full Section 508 compliance, still the webaim.org website is really great. It's got some really good tips. Everything else is not really low-hanging fruit. Everything else that I think that you can do tends to be where most of the effort really comes in. It's like I've actually sat down and used a screen reader and talked to people who have used screen readers, and I know for a fact from personal experience that this is a better approach than this. And that's where, of course, the real-time sync actually comes in.
So in a world where we've moved away from unobtrusive JavaScript to fat
Yeah,
clients, how does accessibility play in? How do you reconcile that?
Well, that's kind of what Aria. That's not the only thing, but that's one of its kind of reasons for being. Is we tend to have this sort of false equivalency of like people who don't have JavaScript and people who are on using accessibility assistive devices. This isn't necessarily the case. Screen readers will totally execute JavaScript, but if it's not a standard HTML tag, how does the screen reader communicate to the person who's just having text read off that like a menu popped up? So Aria has a lot of tools to sort of, for you to like earmark what could happen if they interact with this button. It's going to pop up a menu, and gives the screen reader some way to tell them, hey, a menu just popped up. You probably want to choose from one of these three things. Otherwise, you're not really helping the screen reader to direct the user to the next appropriate step.
Thank you. We have a question from the Q&A queue. So this one is, what are some tools or techniques? Actually, let me select that here. What are some tools or techniques you've found for optimizing the runtime of an Angular application? As you can imagine, as an application grows, it starts to become sluggish, especially if you use lots of filters and ng repeats. Also, yeah, we'll start with that one.
Yeah, that is so being mostly on the UI layer and also mostly on a new product over the past 2 years, we haven't really found ourselves in this situation. But also newer versions of Angular make that question a little bit easier to answer because we did have this one. 1 second, I'm going to share my screen again. One of the few places where we have had a big performance issue that we needed to address is this right here. And you'll see right now it's being a little sluggish. The thing that's actually being sluggish here is the network request and the parsing of the response. Because what we have is about 13,000 restaurants that the restaurant endpoint delivers to us all at once. So you can imagine, okay, so hopefully you guys just saw that scroll bar jump. You can imagine that not only transporting and then decoding a JSON object with like 13,000 restaurants, but painting and searching. Like this was an ng repeat at one point. So one of the things that we did here was, this was before Angular had the bind once syntax. So we had to kind of make our own bind once syntax somehow. So what we did was we didn't want any watchers on this stuff because every time you search, it's going to get repainted anyway. So there's no need to have a bunch of watchers in the background when we can just repaint the whole thing. So this one was a little bit challenging because we had to sort of circumvent most of the default ways that Angular work for us in order to eliminate those watchers. Now we could probably use bind once and have a fair amount of improvement. Another thing that we did here was basically cause it to only ever have about 50 restaurants in the DOM at any given time. And we just basically change out the set of which 50 it's showing as you scroll, which drastically reduced compile time. So you can go real far with those types of issues. What I would say is, get to know your profiling tools, which in itself is pretty challenging.
What?
So these tools here in Chrome Tools, creating profiles and looking at the timeline for memory and paint. Those are really useful techniques to have under your belt.
So if someone's not familiar with how any of these work, do you mind just giving kind of 10 seconds on what exactly is going on there?
Sure. Yeah. I shouldn't have done the whole thing. All right, so, all right. Paul Irish and Adi Yasmani have some really great, they're, development evangelists for Google, and they have some really, really good videos explaining how to use this at a lower level. But basically, a bunch of things are happening, to get this UI on the page ready for our customers to interact with it. In terms of this, we have the JavaScript stuff that's all running, and we also have just like the style sheet being parsed, the layout happening, and then the painting happening. So basically what you would want to do here is you can look at this one. This is for delivering fonts through Typekit. So window.load took 8.60 milliseconds. That's not something we're going to actually care about, but you can imagine if for some reason that was taking 8 seconds, we might want to look into it and we would be concerned. But that's more of a network thing. So if you guys have used this one to look at how long things take to load and in what order, that's this, except this is your JavaScript actually running, your style sheet actually being parsed and painted onto the page. And it basically just gives you a lot of information about what was happening, how long it took. And so what you can do is, for example, if you have a style recalculation that's happening when you don't think it should be happening, or you have one that's slow, is you can attack that one directly and get it down. So learning to use these profiling tools is really useful. It's often in the full app like this, where you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, so it's hard to actually drill in on something and find useful information. Well, sadly enough, that's where often you see your problems, is when you put everything together. But then once you've identified one, it's good to kind of pull it out and work on it independently, which makes this a lot easier to read. And then make use of bind once. When you don't need the two-way data binding or even one-way data binding, that'll reduce the number of watchers. Scott Moss also has done several talks on Angular watchers that are very, very useful about how to, find out how many watchers you have going, and how to make better choices about when to have them and when not to. Let's look at this one.
Cool.
So this one was a scope apply that took almost a whole second. All right. Aside from that, those are two general pieces of advice: is learn some profiling tools and then be conservative. Know kind of what's happening under the hood a little. Realize that when you're putting together a directive and you use that equal sign, or when when you have a controller and you have some data in your scope and you're sort of using it in 3 different places on the page, that's got that data binding stuff happening in the background. And try to only use it when you need it. Other than that, it's going to be one of those things where you have to find where your problems are and deal with them one by one, which is very contextual.
Wow, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a follow-up here, which is, do you follow a particular style guide for writing clean modular code in Angular?
We mostly follow John Pappas. I think we have a few. I think we have a few that are unique to us, but mostly John Pappas is where we refer to. And if you guys don't know that one, let me find it.
Yeah. That'd be awesome to see the link.
All right, there you go. So this guy here, for some reason I don't actually have it styled or starred. He is like, I think, kind of the industry standard for style guide. He's already working on one for Angular too. This is primarily what we follow.
That's awesome. Cool. Thank you. And other questions from the audience? These are great questions so far. Thanks, guys. I know some of you are working with Angular right now.
So I have one last question. It might be slightly off topic. Because of the prevalence I'm seeing of everyone kind of pushing React further because it only, queries a phantom DOM or whatever, do you feel that in general UI design is going in that direction for more responsive design, or does Angular still have a good place in the way it does things, and it's still a better choice, I guess?
Well, not wanting to get into that mess of framework fandom. So there are things that I like very much about Angular, and there are things that I don't. I like that it's a tool for addressing some of the places where you see problems a lot, which is kind of this glue between your business logic and your actual kind of tree of your GUI, which is like the HTML and CSS that is actually currently visible and is impacting what the user sees. One of the biggest causes of bugs is like when you're kind of that glue between here's my DOM and here's my business logic, and they have to sort of, based on my business logic, this has to change. Based on what my user does to this, my business model has to change. Basically, Angular gives you a tool that is still very oriented in HTML to build applications while avoiding that problem. React specifically concentrates on the kind of like the DOM diffing thing. It's a very like aesthetic in what it does that's not about the virtual DOM. Kind of like JSX, that's kind of an aesthetic choice. The virtual DOM, what it does is say, it provides a different kind of syntax through JSX to figuring out what the difference is between the DOM that you currently need based on your application state and the DOM that you currently have, and causes it to repaint. So to me, I'm not a huge fan of React because most of the stuff that React concentrates on is not stuff that, to me, and as an individual person who's not involved with web standards, so take this with a grain of salt. To me, almost nothing that React does is something that can be standardized, which is why I'm not terribly interested in it. If I wanted to write code that had my templates in my HTML, I could still be using jQuery. It wouldn't be as fast because it wouldn't have the virtual DOM, but as far as that part is concerned, to me that's a matter of personal preference. As far as the virtual DOM is concerned, I think obviously it's a great idea because it's very fast, but on the other hand, that's kind of an implementation detail as far as the browser is concerned. The browser can become more efficient at doing DOM changes in a lot of ways. it just doesn't seem terribly likely to me that there will be one virtual DOM implementation that, you know, Blink and WebKit and Edge will all adopt. So that's why I tend to not really keep up with React that well, because I just don't see it really truly lasting, except in terms of a framework. I'm a little bit more interested in things that are actually going to become web standards. And Angular's a framework too. I think you can see some of the influence of Angular 1 on web components, or at least on Polymer, you know, which as one of the early kind of implementations that was using web component standards has had a lot of influence on where the standards are going. React has come out and said that they won't be adopting any web component stuff as part of the React framework. And so to me, that's just, I really can't see it going in that direction. I'm sure that React will remain around and will remain popular and will remain useful, but I don't think that it would be at all accurate to say that that's where UI development is going. Because as far as web UI development, that's all about what the browsers implement. And I just don't see the browsers implementing most of what React is known for.
That's actually a huge relief, because I wholeheartedly agree, but it's nice to actually hear a seasoned UI developer say that and actually know, because Angular seems to make a lot more sense, but if for a long-term framework and actually committing to, but yeah, it's good to hear that that's at least other people have similar opinions. Yeah,
and I mean, and that probably comes off as like critical of React. It's not really intended to be, except in the sense that when it comes to web frameworks, there are frameworks that, like, you can do a web framework in one of two ways. You can do it in a way that's it's kind of like polyfilling, which means like I'm probably filling a need that the browsers will fill. I'm kind of working towards something that I think could become a web standard or an API that the browser will actually be able to provide to me. That's one way of going about it. And another way of going about it is like saying, well, this isn't something that a web browser would ever do, but it's something that's useful in a lot of cases. So here's a utility for it. Here's a library for it. And both of those things are really important, and there's a space for both of them. React to me seems a little bit more like, okay, we're solving a specific problem in a way that we don't anticipate browsers will necessarily do. Whereas Angular kind of does a little bit of both. Like, they do certain things like, wouldn't it be great if this was like something the browser could do for us, and then also this is some specific stuff that the browser probably wouldn't do for you. I don't think that it's likely that we will ever have like a specific NV star system in the browser. I think that will always be in the realm of frameworks. On the other hand, you can see a lot of sort of influence or a lot of commonality between implementing an Angular directive and custom elements. Custom elements have a better life cycle, but the general notion of let me have my custom like HTML tags, to me it's a little bit easier to see the progression from Angular to custom elements than it is to see the progression from React to custom elements.
Awesome, thanks.
I had a quick question. Like when I guess I'm interested in learning, like from you've been in the industry for a while, and learning new things comes, I guess easily. Like let's say if you were presented with like a skill sprint or like learn this framework, like how would you go about like, for example, if I were to undertake learning Angular 2, what steps would you take to learning? So like, what's your workflow for learning new things?
Well, hilariously, if I were going to learn anything from scratch right now, it would be React. I've only played with it like a little, so I'm like, no, there's probably some more stuff that I haven't seen yet that is really great. So, but the stuff that really works for me is kind of attacking it from both ends. First of all, I think it's really, really useful if you kind of understand the reasoning behind a thing. So kind of going to, Angular's website and reading their kind of treatise on how everything fits together and why they did it that way, that's great. But you won't remember it, or I won't, unless I've actually sat down and worked with it and seen it in action and gone, oh, and they said, okay, So I like to pull up the kind of more academic stuff in one window and be reading it, and then come up with a good problem, either one that I just recently solved using something else, or something that I'm pretty sure will give me a lot of opportunities to play with various parts of the framework. So if you were going to use Angular, you wouldn't want to do something that had no HTTP requests, because then you would never be able to use any of the tools and utilities for that. That's why that to-do list app is so popular, because it gives you lists and having to make HTTP requests and having to So and then I like to just sit down and basically redo an app that I just did. So I already know the business case for it. I'll redo it in the thing that I'm trying to learn. I find that that's the most useful, because when you sit down and are really doing a real feature, you'll always find that there were unanswered questions, no matter how well you thought it was planned, or there's stuff that you didn't anticipate that was more challenging to do than you thought it would be. So if you pick something like that, you already know where those areas are, and you can figure out whether it was easier or harder to address them in the new thing. It allows you to sort of make a one-to-one comparison without sort of because I think sometimes you'll see in demos, people just ignore a vast swath of the problem and go, see how easy that was, except it doesn't do anything. So I like to do something that's a little bit more detailed, so that I can be sure that I'm assessing it as accurately as possible.
Cool, thank you. And the reason I ask is because when I was going through learning Angular, there was a lot of stuff that was not very obvious to me at first. When I was first learning, I would go to the docs and I was like, okay, and then I'd read through their explanation. It's like, yeah, I don't get this at all. And then I would do some of the stuff and then build to kind of get a better idea of how to actually implement. And so sometimes the necessity kind of brings the reasoning that you just mentioned, why why do you need links, link functions? Why do you need a compile function? You don't know until you actually this app, I need something to do this thing. Yeah. So.
Yeah, especially when it comes to directives, it's really hard to find cases for that. And probably my least favorite part of Angular as a framework is the Angular 1 directive lifecycle. That's probably my least favorite thing about it. I find that lifecycle to be kind of what? Come on. It's partially vocab, because they call it the compile phase, but the compile phase, they'll call it compiling, but and the link function.
Yeah.
So if you pull the compile service in and you compile, it both compiles and links. So that's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
Because once you learn it, you're like, okay. This compile is different from that compile. It's the same word. It means two separate things. But at first, especially when you're sitting down in front of the docs, I've had many moments where I've been like, what? And I think with directives also, one of the interesting things about putting together a UI library with them, it has been the number of things that we've run into that we never run into in our app by itself. Before, we were trying to make completely independent, completely reusable UI components. There were all kinds of little nuances to directives that we never ran into. They were there, but we never had to know them, and they never caused a problem. Whereas when we were doing the UI library, that directive lifecycle became very, very important to us.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I think we're drawing to a close, but I do have one question that I think is probably on the minds of at least half the people who are listening, which is specifically on getting hired as a front-end developer, which of course is the end goal of many of our listeners. And so specifically, as someone, particularly someone who's coming from a non-traditional background, what can you do to stand out when you're looking for a role on a front-end team?
So, that's a really hard question to answer, and I've been on both sides of it. We're actually trying to hire for a bunch of things, but my team specifically is trying to hire somebody to develop these UI components, because we need some more people. Sitting on both sides of that interview, I can definitely say that kind of being yourself rather than trying to impress is very important. Don't just give the answer that uses the buzzwords. Explain it fully, because explain your thinking fully even if you think you might be wrong about a certain part, because being a good developer means you have to ask a lot of questions. You have to think through a problem in a very sequential way. You have to be able to then communicate all of this stuff to other people. And I've tended to find that we'll have people that will come in and they'll just give completely correct answers, but at the end of the interview, we're not sure if they'll be good fits or not, because even though the answers were correct, we never heard why they thought so, which is actually a lot more important than just getting it right, or giving a right answer, I guess would be to say. And honestly, I think that focusing early on in your career makes a lot more sense to be a full stack developer. It's really important for you to be able to learn how everything fits together on all those layers of the stack. But I think kind of tailoring your resume, tailoring what you talk about to what's relevant to the position helps, rather than mentioning that you know .NET at a shop that doesn't use .NET. I don't really care, probably. So doing a little bit of research beforehand, I think that makes a huge, huge difference, because you're able to sort of talk about your experiences with things that are relevant to that company in a much deeper way than you would have otherwise.
Great. Well, Rachael, thanks a lot. I know we got started just a little bit late, so I think we've hit the end of our road. But again, let me be the first to say thank you. Is there a way that people here can reach out to you, some public profile or something, to say thank you?
Yes, I am Morey on Twitter, MOREWRY. I will also send out these slides that I made for you guys. Maybe put it on the Google Plus page. I know there wasn't much to them, but they've got my contact information in them too. So.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for coming and talking to us tonight. I really would love to continue this, but I know we've probably got dinner waiting.
Me? No, I have to be here till midnight. Just kidding.
Oh, the glamorous life.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's wonderful meeting you guys.
Yeah,
Likewise.
thank you so much.
Good to meet you.
Thank you all.
Good to me.
Thank
Thanks.
you, sir.
And everyone else,
Angular
will see you
rocks.
next week.
React is okay too.